What follows are not the gibberings of a mentally ill conspiracy theorist. As a certified associate emergency manager and a graduate of FEMA Academy, I am telling you that the federal government is not coming to save you when there's an emergency. And they're not supposed to. That's not how emergency management works. And we need to have a conversation about how emergency management does work, because if you're expecting, or worse yet, counting on a response that's never going to come, you're always going to find yourself in a bad situation. So let's get after it. I'm James Merritt, emergency manager and career soldier, and this is Readiness Nation. So based on a great deal of the media pieces and social media posts following Hurricanes Helene and Milton, it's become amazingly apparent that the general public has no idea what FEMA actually does, and perhaps more importantly, what it doesn't do. So because FEMA senior leadership did a horrendous job of explaining all of this to the American people, that unenviable task falls to me. So first up, FEMA is not an emergency response organization. So what exactly do I mean by response? Well, in both the old emergency management cycle and the new emergency management mission areas, response covers things like providing life-saving intervention and aid, preventing the spread of cascading effects, and addressing the primary impacts of the emergency. FEMA doesn't do any of that. FEMA has no response capabilities. FEMA has no response personnel. FEMA owns zero first responder or tactical vehicles, owns no heavy earth-moving or other construction equipment, and FEMA owns zero weapons and no tactical gear of any kind. FEMA is not a response organization. The closest thing FEMA does have to response capabilities are these urban search and rescue task forces. But as you can see, these teams don't actually belong to FEMA. They all come from fire departments, typically in major urban centers. These teams receive additional funding and training from FEMA, and in return are on call to go anywhere in the country that they're needed. So aside from these urban search and rescue task forces, don't expect to see anyone in FEMA-branded equipment rendering life-saving aid. It's not FEMA's role. While we're on the subject, it's also not FEMA's role to fix infrastructure or individual homes during the recovery phase. The recovery phase is all about putting things back the way they were before the disaster occurred. But again, FEMA doesn't have any construction equipment. FEMA has no capability to clear roads, repair bridges, or fix power lines, let alone repair or rebuild individual citizens' homes. There were several media items about people trying to either get material resources or help from FEMA to repair damage to their homes or property and being denied. They were denied because this isn't what FEMA does. So right about now, you're probably yelling at your screen, well then what does FEMA do? Why do they even exist? Well, the answer to that is FEMA does a lot of things, but almost all of them are transparent to the average citizen, even during an emergency. Before emergencies even happen, FEMA has a huge role in the development of emergency management doctrine, like the stuff I reference in these videos and my book, as well as training emergency management professionals on that doctrine via things like FEMA Academy or via the online IS courses like the one that was the basis for my hurricane mitigation video. They even train the public via the CERT program, which we'll talk about in a future video. But doctrine and training are two of FEMA's primary roles. During emergencies, FEMA is in charge of the federal emergency management operation. They facilitate communication and coordination at all levels of the operation. They advise and assist the state-level emergency management operations, and they coordinate for resources that affected states need. When a state in a declared disaster area needs something they can't get via the mutual aid agreements they've made with other states, FEMA steps in to get what the state needs, either from other states or via federal resources. After an emergency, FEMA's primary role is handing out money, and pretty much only money. There are several different federal programs that provide monetary assistance to disaster victims. The $700 emergency relief payments that you probably heard about are just one of the most rapid form of aid that FEMA can offer. They also have lodging reimbursement assistance if you were displaced from your home by a disaster and need to temporarily stay in a hotel. They have rental assistance if you've been displaced and you need to rent new accommodations. They have cleaning and sanitation assistance to help pay for disaster-related cleaning of your property. They have programs to help pay to repair or rebuild your home. They have programs to help pay for accessibility and transportation assistance. And they have programs to help pay to repair privately owned roads, bridges, or docks if your only means of accessing your home has been made impassable by the disaster. All of these forms of assistance are in the form of government grants or loans. So if you show up at a FEMA recovery center, you're going to sit down with a FEMA rep, they're going to ask you a whole bunch of questions and get all of your information uploaded into the system to get you applied for all of the forms of assistance that you might qualify for. That's what they actually do. But if you show up at a FEMA recovery center asking for a chainsaw, a backhoe, and 1,000 pounds of gravel, they're not going to be able to help you, because that's not what they do. It's also likely that the only time you, as the general public, will ever see an actual FEMA employee is at one of these recovery centers. If you ever see people from FEMA going door to door, they're coming around to see if anyone needs to apply for the previously outlined programs. Or they're one of the home inspectors that needs to do the assessments for the approval of those applications. Also, as a side note, because this came up a lot on social media as well, you never need to give FEMA anything in exchange for any of these programs except for information. In the cases of these programs that are loans, you do have to pay the money back because they're loans, but you never have to sign over the deed to your property or anything like that. If someone comes around claiming to be from FEMA and they say you need to give them something or sign over your property to get assistance, they are not from FEMA and it's a scam. So right about now you're probably asking, so if FEMA doesn't do all the stuff that I want and expect to be done during an emergency, who does? Well, the answer to that is simple. You do. Now, I'm only being half cheeky when I say that. But if you're a conservative type that believes in small government and personal responsibility, then you'll be thrilled to know that's exactly the way emergency management is set up in the United States. The literal second thing I ever learned about emergency management is the phrase, all emergencies are local. This means that all emergencies are supposed to be handled at the lowest level possible, and it's only when they can't be handled at one level that the response is elevated to the next level. In this elevation of response, municipalities go to the county goes to the state, and state governors are the ones who are actually in charge of all emergency management operations that happen within their states. The federal government isn't even allowed to legally show up unless the governor requests federal assistance, and it's only at the state level that federal assistance can be requested. The federal government doesn't interface with counties, municipalities, or individual citizens, except in the case of helping them apply for the aforementioned aid programs. So if you're at the individual, municipal, or county level and someone's claiming to be from FEMA and trying to tell you what to do, or especially if they're trying to take anything from you, they are not from FEMA and it's a scam. FEMA doesn't do any of that. And even if they wanted to, FEMA doesn't have the authority to do any of that. And on that note, all federal employees have a federally issued photo ID from their agency and are required to carry it anytime they're on duty, myself included. So anytime anyone is claiming to be from the government, always ask for ID. And if they don't have an ID or they refuse to show you their ID, assume that they are not from the government and it's a scam. But back to the matter at hand. So when there's an emergency, it's first and foremost your local first responders and public works folks that are supposed to address it. If it's too big for them to handle, your municipality should have mutual aid agreements with other nearby municipalities, so they'll send over some of their first responders and public works folks to help out when needed. If it's still too big or all of the municipalities with mutual aid agreements are affected and thus can't help each other, they go to the county for aid. This process is mirrored at the county level, with neighboring counties having mutual aid agreements with each other. And if they're overrun, they go to the state. Each state has a great deal of assets they can bring to bear, including the State Emergency Management Office, state law enforcement, the state health department, and possibly most significantly, the state's National Guard, which can be used entirely at the governor's discretion without having to ask anyone else's permission. States should have mutual aid agreements with each other as well. So when states need assistance from the federal government, it's usually needing money to pay for response and recovery operations, though it is sometimes various material resources, and can even be federal military support, though this is drastically limited under the Posse Comitatus Act. But overwhelmingly, emergency management is a state-led show. So if you don't like how an emergency was managed in your state, take it up with your governor, because that's who's ultimately responsible. Okay, so that covers the whole federalist small government part, but what about the personal responsibility part? Well, under our system of emergency management, you, the individual citizen, are almost entirely responsible for you. You're expected to carry enough private insurance to clean, repair, or replace your home and vehicle after a disaster. You're expected to privately contract with the various service providers you need to clean, repair, or replace your home and vehicle. You're expected to take the necessary preventive and mitigative actions before a disaster to minimize your losses during a disaster. And you're actually expected to self-subsist during and after a disaster. The federal government is not actually supposed to do anything for individual people during or after a disaster. The federal government is there to help the states. The states are there to help the counties are there to help the municipalities, and the role of the municipal governments are to stabilize the situation and clean, repair, and rebuild any damage to municipal property. They clear their roads, fix their bridges, fix their water, power, and gas lines. They make sure all of the systems of the municipality are safe and functional again. But it's on you to do all those things for yourself on your property. It is their job to safeguard life. So if something's on fire, the fire department will be there to put it out. The cops will be out patrolling to maintain rule of law. EMS will be there if you need medical assistance. There will be search and rescue teams if you need to be rescued, but the government doesn't do anything else for individual citizens. It's not the government's role. Any other help you get will be up to non-governmental organizations, charities, and your neighbors. That's why emergency management at the individual and household level is so important. Because the system is designed for you to do for yourself. It's the expectation that you and your neighbors take care of each other and rebuild your community. The federal government really isn't coming to save you. That's not how emergency management works. And with that said, that's going to be it for me. So if you found this information useful, give me the old controlled pair on the like and subscribe buttons. And if you found this information useful enough that you want to buy me a beer about it, there's a link to my Patreon in the description. So until next time, this is James Merritt for Readiness Nation, reminding you to always be the master of your fate and the captain of your soul.